Ortis didn't want this moment to ever end, and thankfully time had seemed to disappear as his arms remained bound around Mythal and hers around him. The cabin walls, dirt floor, and sunlight streaming in from the window may as well have vanished from around him as his entire attention was focused on the embrace. Things only started to slip back into his awareness as Mythal said, "I'd say you certainly kept your promise, Ortis. Invading the underworld to save me definitely qualifies as not abandoning me." His smile widened farther. "And I never will abandon you, Mythal. You can trust me." They finally slowly pulled back from each other, with their faces still very close. Ortis suddenly became nervous looking into Mythal's eyes. He may have been the one to kiss her back when they last saw each other, but that was in the heat of a very emotional moment. Now, even facing off against the 7 Archons felt like little in comparison to deciding if he should kiss her again. Before he could decide what to do, he heard a loud crack of lightning from outside, followed by the distant sound of voices shouting at each other. Lorna suddenly wandered up to the room's entrance and looked at the smashed doors scattered across the floor. "Really, Mythal, are you ever going to learn how to use a door properly? Also, the Thunder Gods are at it again, and unfortunately it seems Zeus #1 has much of his strength back." Ortis sat up straighter in shock. "Wait, what? Zeus is here? And what do you mean, Zeus #1?
"Well, kid, you may have only been out for a week, but you've missed a lot."
The familiar voice of Ares was another breath of fresh air as the red-clad god walked to the doorway behind Lorna, barely fitting in the hallway with his broad shoulders.
"If you've got the strength to walk around, let's give you a quick tour and a rundown of what I'm calling Camp Bad Blood."
Ortis replied, "It's good to see you, Ares, but what happened with Harmonia? And what do you mean a week? My conversation with the Archons only felt like a few minutes." Mythal and Lorna showed no sign of understanding who Ortis had just referenced, but Ares' jaw dropped and remained slack for a moment, before he finally said,
"The Archons. You had a conversation with, well, kid, you might have more to tell us than we do to tell you."
Ortis was given some new clothes to wear as his own had been torn to shreds in the explosion of the Devastator arrow back in Yomi. He also made sure to find and grab his protective gauntlet and his weapon, Suriastra, through which the Archons could still see, hear, and, to a limited degree, interact with him. Facing away from him in the hallway while Ortis got ready, Lorna gave a simple rundown of how everything had gone after Ortis fired the arrow at Tarsa's sphere. A massive plume of flames and smoke had burst up from the cavern he was in, which directly alerted Lorna, Amphenella, and the rescued gods to Ortis' location. When they leapt into the hole, they found Tarsa disoriented and holding only one of 4 pieces of her beast sphere, or, as Ortis now knew it to be, her multiversal orb. She panicked when she saw the other gods appearing and scrambled to grab the pieces of her orb. Seeing how desperate she was to get a hold of them all, Lorna and the other gods took one of them and kept it away from her as best they could. She was weakened from the arrow shot and presumably from not having her full sphere, so Lorna, Amphenella, and the other gods were enough to keep it away from her, and she was eventually forced to flee without the final piece. Ortis' body had been mangled in the explosion, but Ares' gauntlet had protected him from being burnt to ash. Even still, his body was damaged enough that even the Celtic goddess of healing, Brigid, normally would not have been able to save him. Luckily, using the stolen piece of the beast sphere, she eventually learned how to pull additional strength from it to amplify her powers, and she was able to put his body back to normal. Really, better than normal. Even his god-slave scar from Zamrzalak was faded to almost nothing. They'd also been able to use the piece of the sphere to take down the barrier containing Mythal, which luckily protected her from being harmed at all in the explosion. There were more gods in Yomi to be freed, but for the time being the group fled to the exit, found Ares, who'd defeated the Ikazuki and managed to send Harmonia running back to the Imperium Pantheon, and then they'd come to this village to plot out their next move and give the gods time to regain their full strength. Ortis was glad to hear everything had gone smoothly while he was unconscious, but he still had many questions. He was then led by Mythal, Lorna, and Ares out of the large log cabin building he was in to look out across a tattered village full of a few dozen gods and goddesses. Many Ortis recognized from the village in Yomi, where he'd given a rousing speech before being taken by Tarsa. They all looked much stronger now, but at the same time, many looked much more frustrated and were bickering with each other. Where are we? How far from the entrance to Yomi did we get? Ortis asked. Ares replied, shaking his head at the scene.
We got as far out of there as we could. We're back on the outskirts of Greece in an abandoned village that got ransacked by Tarsa's Pantheon ages ago for harboring a god that was scheming to take down her and her cronies. Hermes from my pantheon and Lord Ganesh from the Hindu pantheon were part of the group we saved, and helped us transport all the gods we freed here. Now they might be bickering again about who the real god of transportation is, or which of them is the god of more things. They both got a lot of titles under their belts.
Ortis sighed. Great, so even though all the gods we freed were ones who want to take down the Imperium Pantheon, they're still at each other's throats about who's the god of what? Mythal nodded. And as much as I hate to admit it, I doubt even with Lorna fighting by my side we could simply murder this entire camp. Plus, since you've been unconscious, I've had to spend a week here with this many of them and have had to concede that perhaps not all gods deserve to be slaughtered like mangy animals. If Brigid had not healed you, for instance, you never would have survived that eruption. Speaking of which, Mythal suddenly smacked Ortis's arm, clearly holding back, but it still hurt. What were you thinking firing the Devastator arrow so close to yourself? Sure, it separated Tarsa from part of her sphere and alerted Lorna and the others to your position, but you also nearly obliterated yourself. I know, it probably seems pretty dumb, but, well, it's a long story. First, can someone explain that to me? Ortis pointed up to some mountainous hills past the camp, where lightning and clouds were swirling around, what looked like three figures all yelling at each other. Ares nodded.
That would be our three resident thunder gods. Thor of the Norse pantheon, Aaron of the Slavic pantheon, and who we're calling Zeus number 1. My actual dear old dad. I wish I hadn't fought off Harmonia as fast as I did back outside Yomi, cause she'll probably be pretty interested to learn that the Zeus she's been following ain't actually her gramps. My old man bickering up on that mountain there had teamed up with Tarsa in the beginning, but apparently he wasn't cutting it as her number 2, so she replaced him somehow. Lorna and Amphenella found him chained up in Yomi while they were trying to get to you. Thought maybe Tarsa replaced him with Jupiter from the Roman pantheon, cause those copycats are basically wannabes of our pantheon already. But apparently he's accounted for somewhere else.
Ortis's eyes danced across the ground as he recalled something the Archons had said. In the world Tarsa was overseer of before ours, the Archon mentioned that she had a Zeus of her own as her right hand. Maybe she just brought that one here. Ares stared down at Ortis.
Good, you're really creeping me out every time you mention the Archons. You seriously said you talked to those freaks?
Ortis glanced down at his bow, then back at Ares. Yeah, and I wouldn't speak so poorly of them. But Brigid may have healed my body, but I was only able to return to it because they let me. Before he could explain further, a crack of lightning exploded off the mountaintop and struck one of the buildings, igniting it into flames. A goddess with wavy black flaming hair walked towards it and raised a hand towards the flame, but soon a Japanese god with flames swirling around his body pushed in front of her.
Don't bother, Pele. The real god of fire will handle this.
The goddess then swung her hand near him angrily and pulled all the fire swirling around him into a ball in her palm, then ate it. You can consider yourself the god of tiny embers, Kagetsuki, but I am the true goddess of flames. Instead of putting the fire out, then those two started bickering as well. Before Ortis could react to that, Amphenella suddenly ran into the village. She came straight towards Ares, but her eyes widened when she saw Ortis. Good to see you awake. Your immense bravery, or possibly stupidity, in your battle with Tarsa is well noted. Mythal, Ares, another beast of Tarsa's is on its way. Ortis hadn't noticed at first that she'd had it, but she flipped open the enchanted tome of Echidna, which had a record of every monster in the world. I believe it is the Chinese beast called the Pishu, but Tarsa's own alteration on it, as it does not look as though it is coming to bring us gold and abundance and prosperity. Lorna crossed her arms. Had we not mentioned yet, Ortis, Tarsa has been regularly sending very powerful beasts here to try and retrieve her sphere shard, as well as destroy us, or at least divide us. Not that these whiny gods need much help being divided. Even Ares has had his share of squabbles with the Egyptian god of war.
Hey, I'm just saying, having the head of a lion doesn't suddenly make you a cooler god of war. I mean, who historically has had better wars? Humans or lions, am I right?
Another crack of lightning struck near the village. Ortis clenched his teeth, thinking about how these petty beings were the leaders people in his world were looking up to. He drew back Suriastra and fired it right for the spot on the mountaintop where the thunder gods were bickering. The shot struck and exploded stone shards all around the gods. If Ortis had been that close to it, he would have been sent flying back, but the mighty thunder gods were only disoriented by it. Ortis yelled up to them, "Zeus, Thor, Perrin, get down here now!" The whole village went quiet. Ares leaned down to Ortis.
Kid, I don't think my old man and the other thunder gods are gonna take orders from..."
Ortis ignored him and yelled again, "Don't make me ask twice!" He drew back his bow one more time threateningly, but before firing, 3 bursts of lightning shocked the mountaintop and the gods disappeared from their perch before appearing directly in front of Ortis in the village. They were all well-muscled men much taller than Ortis, with large beards and hair of varying colors. Thor was more rotund, with a red beard and wielding a sparking hammer. Zeus looked much older and had a white beard and hair. Perrin had silver hair and orange beard, but a golden mustache. All of them looked furious. Perrin spoke first.
"The only reason I do not strike you down where you stand, mortal, is because you helped rescue me from Yomi. But do not think that gives you the right to speak to the god of thunder that way."
Thor then bumped his arm into Perrin as he said,
"True, your valor is appreciated, but as Perrin said, you cannot disrespect me, the true god of thunder."
Zeus then said,
"You children can squabble all you want about who is my underling, but I am the one and only god of thunder."
Thor chuckled.
"Please, you're not even the one and only Zeus, apparently. I don't see her around here, by the way. Maybe even she thought the new Zeus was an improvement. Or she just finally got sick of your famous infidelity and stopped taking it out on your kid Heracles and moved on from you."
Zeus turned from Ortis to push his face towards Thor.
"Speak of infidelity only after you remind me of how many of your siblings are the children of your own mother Jord. And I failed to see your wife, Sif, here. Perhaps she's still sulking in a childish depression because of the time your uncle gave her a haircut."
Thor was about to retort when Ortis yelled, "That's enough! I'll start treating you like gods when you stop acting like whiny children. I know mortal toddlers with more worthiness to be gods than you." They stopped bickering and leered down at him. Perrin's hands sparked with electricity.
"Your bravery was clearly just masked stupidity, mortal. If you think you can speak to us this way, unpunished."
Ortis took a step closer. "I just died and went face to face with the 7 Archons who created all physical reality and handled them just fine. You think anything you can threaten me with is going to be scarier than that?" A voice suddenly spoke into Ortis's head through Suriastra.
"Handled us? You handled us, did you? The absolute ghoulies on this kid."
Ortis recalled the voice as that of the Orange Archon, but the Red then said,
"Mind your tongue, boy. Do not think that because we allowed you to return, you have the right to belittle our names."
Ortis thought back to them. "Right, sorry, I'm just trying to make a point. I need them to listen to me if I'm going to get their help defeating Tarsa. Any chance you can give me something through the bow to make this easier?" The Orange one spoke again.
"Now the kid wants us to give him weapon upgrades. The Devastator arrow wasn't enough for you?"
"This kid is a riot! Coming your way! Show these thunder gods what's what, boy!"
The Orange spoke again.
"Wait, don't! Our connection is limited, you can't..."
But his words faded before Ortis could hear more. It seemed, at least for the moment, they'd disappeared, though he did sense that something had been added to the bow. 2 words lingered in his mind that didn't seem to be his own thought. Zeus stepped closer to Ortis, staring daggers into him.
"I don't know how you know of the Archon Titans, but if you think anyone would believe a mortal like you could even have an audience with them, let alone handle them as you so put it, then you must think you live in a world of fools."
Ortis really hoped his new weapon upgrade would be impressive, as he said, "Not only have I spoken to them, but they've given me help to ensure I can lead whoever will follow to defeat Tarsa. And with their help, even a mortal can command your precious thunder." He drew back his bow and said, "Thunder Arrow." Electricity suddenly got pulled straight out of Zeus, Thor, and Perrin's body, as well as from the air all around Ortis. A blue and gold sparking arrow appeared on his bow. The 3 thunder gods before him all looked drained of energy as he aimed the bow straight up and fired it into the air. Lightning streamed into the sky, then exploded, sending a shockwave of black clouds and electricity all across the air for miles. The sound of thunder sent a shockwave through the village that nearly knocked Ortis over, but he held his ground, standing as confidently as he could, trying not to react to how cool that had looked. As the sound cleared, Zeus, Thor, and Perrin all regained their strength, with electricity from the air finding its way back into their bodies. They all looked down at Ortis in shock. In fact, the entire village was in awe of him. Ortis looked back to see Ares, Lorna, Amphenella, and Mythal all staring at him in shock as well. Mythal looked like she was about to burst out laughing, but held it in. Ortis turned back to the still stunned thunder gods and spoke, addressing the whole village. Our world looks up to you all. Different regions look up to different gods, but you're all the leaders of this world, and the world needs you to act like it. I admit, when I first met the Godquellers, Mythal and Lorna, I just wanted revenge. I was angry and was happy to just try slaughtering all the gods, but I know now that was wrong. I've met beings far more powerful than any god, and they wanted to rule this world too. I've realized that there are always going to be people who want to rule or lead, and maybe the answer isn't to try and eradicate all leaders, but to try and make sure the leaders people look up to are actually being a good influence. I've been told that you gods and goddesses once did set a good example for how people should act, but in my lifetime I've never seen that. I've seen this. He gestured to them all. I've seen the bickering and fighting over who is the god and goddess of what. And when the beings we mortals look up to argue and bicker about petty things, then that's how the whole world starts to act. We don't need you all to be killed off, but we do need you to start doing better. Be the influence that your people need so they can realize that being good and kind and compassionate is more important than arguing over whose gods are best. I also know your confusion isn't totally your fault though. I thought Tarsa was going to try ruling the world by making everyone as scared and confused as possible, but I now know she already did that to you gods a long time ago. You all did come from your own worlds, where you were the one and only god or goddess of thunder, fire, water, or whatever else. That's also why so many of you have different stories of how the world was created. The different pantheons and their people all did come from different worlds originally. Tarsa was given the power to merge all our worlds into one, and apparently made sure very few people knew that she'd done so. The whole crowd started muttering. Ortis's gaze fell on Zeus specifically, who seemed as though he were remembering a long-lost memory. A few others seemed to have the same look. I know that it must be frustrating to have been the only god of your respective element, but now, like it or not, none of you are the sole god of any one thing. You have to accept that in different regions of our now unified world, there are gods with your same power and claim to your title, but that doesn't make you any less important as a leader to the people who still look up to you. You are no less important to them, and they need to see you accepting the gods and people of different regions so they can see that this is the right way to be, accepting that others can look up to different gods or leaders without considering those people a threat to their own beliefs. Ortis started seeing some nods in the crowd, and some smiles, even from Thor directly before him. Before he could continue, though, a roar rolled through the village that kicked dirt up off the ground. They all turned and saw the monstrous Pishu Amphenella had mentioned. It must have been 40 feet tall, with much of its winged dragon lion body covered in gold. Ortis quickly continued. And also, in case you haven't noticed, the world really needs you all to be better at working together so that we can finally defeat Tarsa and her pantheon and all their monsters. Trying to challenge their rule on your own got you all captured and taken to Yomi. Show her how powerful you are when you work together. Perrin suddenly clapped a hand onto Thor's shoulder. Perhaps this respectful mortal makes good point. Zeus, what say you to the idea of channeling the might of 3 thunder gods into one? Zeus looked back at Ortis briefly, then rolled his eyes at Thor before putting his own hand on the Norse god's shoulder.
Fine, but only on the condition that you both do the same for me when it comes time to slay the imposter, Zeus.
Storm clouds formed above them and lightning surged down from the sky, threw them both into Thor, who started floating up off the ground, sparking with electricity.
Oh, now this is some next level thunder.
Ares in the background muttered to Lorna.
Is this just me, or do too many people use thunder and lightning interchangeably? I mean, thunder is the sound, right? Am I nuts?
Mythal cut in. Shh, I'm watching the show. The Shinto fire god Kagatsuki too seemed to be aiming his hands at Pele from afar, sending waves of heat towards her as she grew taller, with magma dripping from her hair as she marched towards the Pishu. Thor hovered up near her and the beast thrust its head forward, spreading its maw wide. It spat a beam of melted steaming gold towards them. Thor aimed his sparking hammer Mjolnir in front of him. A fraction of the lightning igniting his body then burst through it and met the gold beam. It exploded all around them, evaporating the beam, sending sparkling glimmers across the village. Pele then leapt through the gold dust with a molten ball of flame swirling in her hand. She swung it and smashed it right into the creature's face. After a second of pause after she struck, it exploded into a burst of molten rock, sending the massive creature spiraling sideways, bowling over a dozen trees. As soon as it was standing again, with its face melting away, a lion-headed god in Egyptian garb stomped over, wielding a hammer of his own, glowing with the red mist of Ares' ability to fortify weapons.
You don't get that expensive-looking beastie on her. You're still not as cool of a god of war as I am, but I believe in you.
The Pishu spread its wings and leapt up into the air, then swung a paw on her's head. The Egyptian god raised his own paw-like hand and caught the swipe, pulled the beast farther down and swung his fortified hammer upwards, smashing the creature's head once more and sending it spiraling towards the low-hanging clouds above. When it was close, a feathered tail swung out of those clouds and wrapped around the creature. Soaring down out of the white mist came a multicolored feathered serpent, dragging the Pishu towards the earth again. It got near, spun its body around, and slammed the beast into the ground, quaking the whole village. Ortis then noticed that strapped to this serpent's neck was the shard of the multiversal orb they'd managed to take from Tarsa. Before Ortis even had time to ask, Mythal stepped up next to him. Ortis, meet Quetzalcoatl. We decided a few days before you awakened that he was the most worthy god of protecting the piece of Tarsa's sphere we recovered. He's one of the few gods who has squabbled with no one. I think you're going to like him. The Pishu tried to leap back into the air, but Quetzalcoatl smacked it with its tail and knocked him back to the ground. Thor and Pele both aimed their elements towards Anher's weapon. The Egyptian god's already fortified hammer became charged with a swirl of magma and lightning swirling around it. He stomped up to the beast, raised his weapon, and slammed it straight down onto the monster's head. It smashed straight through and erupted a massive crater in the earth around him. As the beast's head burst, melted gold flew all around it, coating over the trees and ground. Tarsa's monster had been nowhere near a match for the gods when they combined their might together. Many of the gods and goddesses of the village cheered, though Zeus wasn't one of them. He turned back to Ortis and stared at him again. From the corner of his eye, Ortis saw Mythal's smoke swirling around her hand, ready to make a weapon. Zeus then said, I still expect more respect from you than you've shown thus far, mortal. With that said, I will conduct myself in a way that makes it clear I am worthy of that respect. I will be the leader my people need. He held out his large hand towards Ortis. Ortis's palm was dwarfed by the god, but he shook with full confidence. Understood, Zeus. Thank you. Now, how about we get ready to crash a party that's supposed to be in your honor? Zeus quickly realized what he meant and grinned. I will gather as many of my pantheon as I can find. Zeus vanished in a burst of lightning and Ortis turned back to Mythal. And it's about time we got you back to doing what you're best at. We may be working with a bunch of them now, but there are still a lot of gods that we need you to quell. Mythal picked up Ortis and kissed him. He put his hands on either side of her face and kissed her back, his heart racing from the rush of confronting the gods and being reminded again that he was finally reunited with Mythal. After a moment, she set him back down. Right, still lots of murdering to do. She turned to Lorna. What do you say, sister? Are you willing to partake in the adventure now? Lorna rolled her eyes. Surprisingly, I actually am, I've decided. I suppose reading about great adventures doesn't quite match partaking in them, so I can do my part to help with all the murdering that needs doing." Mythal bounced up and down and hugged her reluctant sister. Ortis looked out across the now celebrating group of gods. This was the best he'd felt since his adventure with Mythal had began. But there was still a lot of work that needed doing. Tarsa and Zeus number 2 would likely be ready for them. But that wasn't going to stop Ortis and his god army from crashing the Olympic Games.
We are long overdue at this point to have Mythal start doing stuff in this series again. She's been on the sidelines for like half the series now. But don't worry, she will play a very big role in the rest of the series going forward. And now you know the usual ending spiel. If you enjoyed this and you haven't seen all of Mythal Lethal, you might want to go back to the beginning, or you might enjoy my Summoner's Beast saga that I have going right now, or Vigilance, or maybe some of my one-offs like Terminax. I also did put up a teaser on Patreon showing people the other series that I have in the works to start after these 3 are done. And all the bonus stuff on the Patreon is free, so if you want my inks and high-resolution art, you can get access to those on there. Or join the $1 a month tier just to help support the channel. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a message I've probably used as an ending note before, maybe even a few times, but I read it in a way that I thought was really nice and succinct this week. Which is that if you believe it will work out, you'll see opportunities. If you believe that it won't, you will see obstacles. Basically just a good reminder that your mindset going into anything will help you see either the good in that situation or the bad, and your likelihood at succeeding in anything improves if you believe it is possible that you will succeed. I hope that's inspiring, I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. Goodbye.